So my name is Lydia Broner, and I'm the Associate Curator of Public Programs at the Museum of Arts and Design. And on behalf of myself and everyone else here at the museum, we're so delighted that you'll be spending part of this evening with us. And we are so delighted that we can connect with you and we can connect with our community around the world, around the United States, or around New York City. I've really been looking forward to tonight. In our dreams last year, when we first talked about this, we would all be in our theater at the museum. And if we can't be there, then I'm so happy that we can be here. So before we begin, obviously, we offer our warmest thanks from the museum to our colleagues at New York City Jewelry Week for their support, and for Art Jewelry Forum for partnering with us on this really special event. Just to quickly let you know, the museum's now open on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sundays, and we encourage everyone to stop by and see our exhibition, 45 Stories of Jewelry, 1947 to Now. And if you haven't yet, we encourage you to check out our other program during NYCJW, which is under Durational Events. And this is a recorded conversation with the committee of experts and geniuses who put together 45 Stories in Jewelry, which is a fabulous permanent collection show. As always, for every program that I always do, I'm going to put my email address in the chat. So please shoot me an email if you'd like to know more about visiting the museum and our offerings, anything else I can help you with. But now, without further ado, I am going to bring on Yvonne Montoya, Executive Director of Art Jewelry Forum, who's going to introduce our distinguished panelists, Harriete Estel Berman, Joyce Scott, and our fabulous moderator, Cindi Strauss. So, passing it over. Bye, everyone.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Lydia. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with our co-hosts and our dear friends at MAD, as well as our own community of AJF members. It's so good to see all your names and your faces here tonight. Congratulations, New York City Jewelry Week and Bella and JB for another successful year. It's already successful, even though it hasn't finished yet. Thank you for bringing us this opportunity so that we can all come together to talk about the jewelry that we love, the jewelry that makes us think. Another great reason to be here tonight is to celebrate a new book that was produced through AJF's Fiscal Sponsorship Program. A fiscal sponsorship program provides financial management for projects in the art jewelry field. And for more information, I will put a link in the chat window in a little bit. Of course, you can always email me. The book that we're going to discuss tonight is called Flux, American Jewelry and the Counterculture, and that's the beautiful front and back cover that you're seeing now. It's just a gorgeous book with beautiful illustrations and excellent writing, of course. It can be purchased right now through AJF's website for a special price while supplies last. 100% of the proceeds go towards AJF. I will put a link to the bookstore in the chat window for you too. Tonight's talk is called Civil Rights and Body Politics. Our panelists are Harriete Estel Berman and Joyce J Scott. But first, moderating for us is AJF board member Cindi Strauss. And she is very special to AJF. Of course, she's a board member. She's also the Sara and Bill Morgan Curator of Decorative Arts, Craft and Design, and Assistant Director, Programming at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. Cindi received her BA with honors in art history from Hamilton College and her MA in the history of decorative arts from the Cooper Hewitt Parsons School of Design. At the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, Cindi is responsible for the acquisition, research, publication, and exhibition of post-1900 decorative arts, design, and craft with a specialty in contemporary jewelry. She has authored or contributed to catalogs and journals on decorative arts and design topics, and has been a frequent lecturer at museums nationwide. As for our panelists, Harriete Estel Berman, she uses post-consumer recycled materials to construct artwork ranging from jewelry to judica, sculpture and installations of social commentary. Her work is included in the permanent collections of 16 museums, including the Jewish Museum Berlin, where it's on view until 2035. Berman's artwork and jewelry is featured in over 42 books. And also with us tonight is MacArthur Genius Fellow Joyce J Scott, best known for her figurative sculpture and jewelry using bead weaving techniques, as well as blown glass and found objects. As an African-American feminist artist, Scott unapologetically confronts difficult themes as diverse as her subjects, which include race, misogyny, sexuality, stereotypes, gender inequality, economic disparity, history, politics, rape, and discrimination. Over the past 50 years, Scott has also established herself as an innovative fiber artist, printmaker, installation artist, vocalist, and performer. Scott has been the recipient of countless commissions, grants, awards, residencies, and prestigious honors. Before we start, I wanted to mention that in order to allow more time for this discussion, we won't be taking questions during the program. So now I will turn it over to moderator Cindi Strauss.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. If you haven't done so already, set your Zoom screen to speaker view, because that way, when each one of the panelists is speaking, you'll get to see their face on the top of your screen. I want to start off by thanking everyone at the Museum of Arts and Design, New York Jewelry Week, and of course, Art Jewelry Forum for putting together this panel on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. This new book, In Flux, American Jewelry and the Counterculture, which I co-authored with Susan Cummins and Damian Skinner. And this is a project that we have been working on for almost 5 years. It started out with a simple question: what makes American jewelry American? And what we found was an incredibly rich history that was not often told in the standard narrative that I too speak about all the time. We focused our book on the period of the 1960s through the very first years of the 1980s, the pre-AIDS period, if you will. And as I think most of you know, the history of the field of American jewelry is usually told from a perspective about its internal development, innovations in materials and techniques, and the ambitions of jewelry artists to make wearable objects that challenged artistic norms. Our book looks at this generative period in American jewelry, but it is looking specifically at a type of jewelry that was made during the most turbulent times in American history before today, and jewelry and metalwork that responds to those turbulent times in specific. The book contextualizes jewelry and metalwork of this genre within the social, cultural, and political landscape of the period. Susan, Damian, and I did countless in-depth interviews with living artists, as well as cultural historians and curators who were working and were fully participating in what was happening within the jewelry field in America. We also had the privilege of working with many institutions on archival research. And I just want to give a shout out to the Library and Archives of the American Craft Council, as well as the Archives of American Art. Both are incredible resources for research on American craft, but specifically jewelry and metalwork during this period. The jewelry that we research and present in this book deals with narrative and pictorial elements that broadcast messages about particular subjects or experiences. This jewelry was made in a wide geographical areas across America, but there was certainly a particular nexus for it on the West Coast, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Seattle, and in central Washington state. We learned that the majority of the jewelers that we researched were trained and came out of those early university programs that were established in the post-World War II era. But once they graduated, or at the end of their graduating terms as either undergraduate or master's students, they turned towards new directions, exploring cues from broad artistic movements such as assemblage, funk, pop art, and other movements. And they responded particularly to what was happening in everyday life and what they were experiencing. This group of American jewelry artists had their own relationships, their own institutions, such as Somerville, not necessarily SNAG or the American Craft Council, groups like the National Conference of Artists or AfriCobra. They had their own champions, they had their own connections. They were both inside and outside of the mainstream field. We had an incredible opportunity not only to dive deeply into well-known artists, and here you're seeing images by works by Fred Wall and Don Tompkins, but also rediscovering artists who had been lost to history or highlighting little-known aspects of other artists' work. And what we realized was all of these artists were part of a larger American counterculture. And when we hear the term counterculture, we often think of hippies, we think of people dropping out, communes, drugs, etc. But what we learned is while there were certainly jewelry artists who lived an alternative counterculture lifestyle, there were just as many artists who would not define themselves how they lived their lives as part of the counterculture, but by virtue of the art that they were making, they were delving into counterculture themes. These artists were part of a group of young Americans who at this time were rejecting the promise of prosperity and the dreams of their parents. They were angry about the Vietnam War. And you can see a work here by Don Tompkins. Nixon, as I showed you previously, was a huge influence on many of these jewelers. He was such a divisive figure. And same in the way with funk art, individual figures in politics and in culture were skewered or just outright criticized. Here you can see with Don Tompkins with this wittily titled pendant Nixon, Bring It Together, using assemblage to both cast figures like Mickey Mouse, which kind of brought the world together, Nixon with his ideas of bringing the world together, and then this unbelievable image of Marianne Vecchio with the body of Jeffrey Mueller, one of the students that was killed in the Kent State tragedy. And so here, bringing all those together in this commemorative medals series, Tompkins is offering commentary on the political situation, President Nixon and Vietnam War. Other artists delved into more happening type experiences, such as William Clark in the San Francisco Bay Area, an artist of great interest who has been lost to history. Louis Mueller, here, this great young picture of him, and a series of works that are in the MFA Boston in Daphne Farago's collection, in which he is using branding to comment on commercialism and other issues that were happening. We also learned a lot about what was the possibilities for African-American artists during this time. Evangeline Montgomery, who some of you may know, was one of the most significant female artists during this period, organizing exhibitions at Mills College and also creating her own metal work dealing with issues of civil rights. And feminism, the big hot button issues for the late 1960s and into the 1970s, equal rights for women, was addressed by artists like Marilee Tompkins, you're seeing here, whose snatch purse on the left was unapologetically sexual and telegraphed a message about women being in charge of their own bodies. Our two esteemed panelists this evening were right in the thick of things during this period. And we have both Harriet and Joyce to talk about not only some specific works from the period, but also some of the issues that they were grappling with as artists and as jewelers and metalsmiths. And we are going to focus just on their experiences and work of this 1960s, 1970s, and first few years of 1980s period. So know that while Joyce and Harriet, as well as many of the other artists in our book, continue to make jewelry until today, grappling with so many of these same issues that we're still facing in this country, for the purpose of this panel and also reflected in the Influx book, we are just going to be talking about the earlier decades. So I'm going to start with a few general questions for Harriet and Joyce. I assume that most people on this panel are familiar with your work and familiar with broad strokes of your history. But I'd like to start by asking both of you why you decided to focus your artistic pursuits on jewelry and metalwork as young women going into training and university. Harriet, you are muted.
I'll start.
Thank you. Joyce.
I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art. As a freshman, I was sure I was going to be a painter, and I was disabused of that idea. I was told that I should stop painting for the betterment of myself and the entire human race. And that is true. I'd always done many different things and started making jewelry that I could really sell when I was around 15, and I was at MICA at 17. So it seemed like a plausible thing to do. It's, you know, first access to being able to buy art because it's jewelry and it's something that people can afford and something that they can have a first person relationship with. And the materials were easily acquired.
Did you feel, before we ask Harriet to answer, did you feel that the jewelry field offered you a place to examine your ideas and perhaps challenge society through your work? Or at this time, were you mainly focused on skill building and making a living from your work?
I was in my 20s in the 70s. So I don't know how much I was thinking about the future and making a lot of money. I don't even know if I gave a lot of thought to whether or not the school was giving me what I needed. I know that I went in thinking I'm going to get what I need. And I don't mean that in a pushy kind of, in a pushy way, but I knew that it had a great deal to offer me. I knew that I was in the real minority and that I would have to seek it and I'd have to employ it myself, because that had always been what my family did, what many Black people did, making a way where there was no way. I knew that my whole life would always be in the arts, but I can't say that I was as pragmatic as to think about those things at 21 or 2 or 5. I was just having a lot of fun.
Fun is good, especially when you're young. Harriet, why did you decide to focus your pursuits on metalwork and jewelry?
Initially, I was introduced as a freshman to the metal arts program at Syracuse University, and I had the opportunity to take a class, and I immediately felt like I found my material. And from then on, I spent about every second in the metal studio that I had. I think working with metal requires developing a gigantic skill set. And so I had 4 years of metalsmithing education, plus after school I worked in jewelry stores doing jewelry repair, and then I worked as silver repair, and I was always interested in expanding my repertoire of skills. But making the work that I wanted to make eventually became not just about the techniques, but about the messages that I wanted to send in the work.
Yeah, we're going to start showing a few of those works, and you see that Harriet's in her studio and is going to be showing some of the pieces in person that we're going to show in slides in a few minutes. For both Joyce and Harriet, we talked last week, I guess it was, about the fact that both of your work over the course of your careers has put forth messages and feelings about whether it's personal experiences or larger social, political, or cultural events. And part of our research in terms of this book was to try and understand what the jewelry field cared about during these early decades. And we have to remember that SNAG, the first professional organization just for jewelry and metalsmiths in North America, wasn't founded until 1969. So before that, it was up to individuals, metal arts societies, university programs, other kinds of groups that brought jewelry and metalsmithing artists together. From your time in university and then just after, when you're starting out, so in the 70s, do you feel like the jewelry field actually really cared about issues or cared about things other than establishing professional guidelines, techniques, selling work, etc.?
If I can jump in. When I was aware of SNAG in the beginning from its very inception, because I was in school at the time and Michael Jerry was part of that first group starting SNAG. But metalsmithing as a whole and the jewelry world, it inherited a whole lot of rules about what was proper metalwork, design aesthetic, like you mentioned in the book about Scandinavian design being a tremendous influence in both jewelry and hollowware. There were all kinds of prohibitions about what materials you should or shouldn't use. And so when people like Fred Wall are using staples and pieces of junk, that was essentially an anomaly. While it's the focus of the book, it was incredibly unusual. And when I started making my appliances, which was metalwork, and I was painting my metal, it was like completely foreboding. And the silver iron is another example where I entered it into a design competition sponsored by the silver companies of the time, and it was rejected. They did not admit it for the exhibition because I had taken the silver and made the silver black on the outside. And this broke so many of their rules for the way silver should look. They couldn't even consider using it in the exhibition. And so it's quite amazing.
Well, and before we kind of dive a little bit more deeply into your appliance series, Joyce, I wanted to ask you the very same question, which is from your personal experience and the kind of work that you were starting to make in the 1970s, do you feel like the larger jewelry, metalsmith, craft world cared about the kinds of things that you were interested in, you were commenting on?
I have to say that I also studied metal work and I couldn't do it. That's why I really give great props to Harriet and others, because I just wanted to melt everything, and that wasn't going to work. I think we're talking with a very Western viewpoint, because I was blessed to travel, and I went to graduate school in Mexico, and people were making jewelry out of bottle tops and squiggly cans. And once I started traveling, I saw the same thing everywhere else. I remember feeling that what was happening with jewelry was like a byproduct of what was happening with the rest of the society. And when it talked about ethnic groups, or when it talked about these different themes, they'd have to fit into fashion or something else. So if you remember, there was a whole period about indigenous people, and then everybody was wearing fringe and beadwork on something. And then everybody was Black Power, and everybody had on an afro. I mean, so it had to do with that kind of comfort and a pop aesthetic. And I think that this kind of thing where you would make money or whatever, that all came out of that. I did not know whether this system had a place for me. I just knew that I belonged there, so I went. And because I wasn't the only one who did that, then I don't know if we were embraced, but certainly some shades went up and some doors creaked open.
And I think you make an excellent point, Joyce, about this being a Western viewpoint. It was something that we encountered during the research of our book. One of the exhibitions that we discovered, Native Funk and Flash, which has an excellent catalog for those of you who have access to a good library, is very much within the genre of what you were talking about. Incredible works made with alternative materials, feathers, fringe, etc. You know, done to the highest levels of artistic creativity, but certainly addressing or playing into specific ideas. We do talk about and did learn a lot about travel. You mentioned your travel to Mexico and to see the revelation of seeing artists and artisans working with other materials. We know that jewelry artists like Ramona Solberg and Arlene Fish and others were active in their travels, and the lessons learned, whether it was aesthetically or functionally, or the types of materials to be used in jewelry, certainly influenced some of their work during this period. And with Arlene's incredible large-scale body ornaments, issues of feminism and female power certainly come into the conversation. The World Craft Council was very active in that period in terms of encouraging cross-country, cross-cultural exchanges, and the ability to look at different fields and different media in new ways, or to experience it the same way, Joyce, that you did as a young person, and having that open up a whole new world of possibilities for you.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
I'm totally remiss if I did not give honor and praise to my mother, Elizabeth Caldwell Talford Scott, who was my first art teacher, a nationally known textile artist, and who taught me how to take aluminum foil, we called it tin foil back then, squeeze it together, a round string, and make beads, and then to paint them and glue stuff on them. So I come from many generations of people who did just that because they couldn't go out and buy anything because they didn't have any money. This is in no way to diminish or lower any kind of stuff that's taught in institutions, because I went to institutions, and it's the blend that has made me who I am today. But the thing about coming from my mother and her hands giving me my passport to make what I do, it's something that I could not mention.
Thank you, Joyce. Harriet, your work, particularly the Family of Appliances You Can Believe In series, and you mentioned this silver iron here, very much comes under the idea of feminism and of female equal rights. There was the ERA trying to be passed during this time. There was the establishments of the National Organization for Women, but equally important, there were expectations of women that came out of their own families, their family history, the mid 20th century, 1950s ethos.
Yes,
Can
that
you
we all
talk a
grew up
little
in
bit
50s.
about how your work in general, but then this series in particular, how is feminism relevant to this work? How did you as an artist experience it and channel it into the pieces in this series?
That's like a gigantic question, but
I know, I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, first starts out with the idea that I grew up in the 1950s and 60s, and in the 50s you have still this idealized idea, the idealized role playing of a housewife at home taking care of children that was post World War II. It's mentioned in the book several times. And so I grew up with this idea that I loved being domestic and sewing and ironing and making my own clothes. And yet when you're going to college and you're getting an education and you then have professional aspirations for yourself as what you could not only become as a person, but that, what is the potential for all women being educated and having larger roles in society. And there's a conflict, because if you want to have children and you want to take care of your house, you're going to be playing two roles at a very minimum. And also another aspect that comes into the appliances was that my observation was that so many men dominated the art world, and to a large extent even in the craft world as having large visibility. So you have this inherent conflict between your professional aspirations and maybe what you grew up idealized as a young girl. And that was the real source for the appliances. And then as a young woman, you're always running up against people's expectations of you as a woman in what they thought was a male domain, especially if I was working as a professional jeweler and it was all men. And or people would walk into the store and a mundane example, but they'd say, well, I want to speak to the jeweler. And it would make my head almost explode. It's different now. I think that people realize that women can have a much larger role. And at the same time, I look at what's happening now in society with the COVID, and one parent has to stay home and take care of the children and do the homeschooling. And so there's a lot of choices that are being made, and a lot of women are giving up their professional aspirations, at least for this year or so. So those issues that I saw 40 years ago are coming back to haunt us big time.
I was going to say, I think this series, and we'll show a couple of slides, and you have the pieces so people can see the scale of them behind you, from your Appliances You Can Believe In series, are incredibly relevant and remain relevant today. Here with buns in the oven. The thing that I love about these pieces, Harriet, is that they are serious, and yet they are leavened by humor in terms of the way that you have chosen the individual motifs. The oven here with the perfect place setting and silver candelabra, and even on the back when the text that you use to help bring forth your messages on these works really just hammers it home.
Well, I wanted people to find the work accessible, which is why I started with the humor aspect and perhaps buns in the oven. The titles might be an entree, but they did discuss very serious, maybe even angry topics.
So tell us a little bit, particularly about Womanizer here. And I'm not sure if everyone can see the text that are on each one of the buttons. So maybe you could take us through that.
Well, this is Womanizer Kitchen Queen. It's a blender which has a 10 button panel. It says love, honor, obey, cherish, mix, blend, stir, cream, spread, bear. And when I was making it, I would study industrial design and appliance design, and I decided I have to have a 10 button panel to describe the 10 roles that women play. Inside of the blender container is a little ballerina that turns to music. And the music is can you wish upon a star, all your dreams come true. And on the top is a crown. And the crown says, Mistress of the Home. And there's two reasons for that. One, I was referring to the Miss America type contests, where there's beauty contests, which they still have, that they hang on to these relics of past fashion. And I thought that it was a very narrow definition of what women could be, but also turns out that Harriet means mistress of the home. So there is a very definite autobiographical content to every one of the pieces.
And I think that they brilliantly skewer and bring forth, I can see anger, I can see sorrow, I can see questioning, I can see humor, all throughout this piece, embodied in one. The scale that we can see it behind you is really helpful to be able to understand the power of these works.
Do you want me to show you the appliances in person?
Yeah, if you could hold them up while you, the last one we're going to show, because I want to be mindful of time,
okay,
is Marry Me for My Hobart, with its mixer, with its Dream Whip that you have. Maybe you can hold them up and show them to us while you talk a little bit about.
I'm going to bring the camera in, and you can look at Marry Me for My Hobart. And it says that on the side, marry me for my Hobart, because I actually knew somebody who I thought he married her for her Hobart mixer. And speaking of jewelry, it actually has a 14-karat gold ring in the front of the nose. And it says Dream Whip on the bottom. And not only did it come from the story and the stories that I have, my autobiographical content, but as a social commentary about how so many people marry their partner for their Hobart, or perhaps their car or house, for superficial reasons.
Yes, and that goes back to the expectations of a lot of American families that from the 1950s and 1960s that instilled in their young women and their sons about the kind of person that you should marry and the type of life that you should have. And these are the ideas, the feelings, the concepts that you and other artists of your generation were rebelling against.
Yeah, and also here I am fabricating essentially what would look like a manufactured object. And so I'm taking like my consummate set of skills, fabricating something. And I have to say that I love the fabrication, but the idea is more to talk about how we covet consumer items in our society today. And we see it all the time. It doesn't matter whether it's a car or you go for walks and you see people and they have the largest possible television set.
It's true. It's true. Joyce, I wanted to ask you, how did you feel as a female artist in this 1970s period, as you were both a student and growing into an emerging artist, how did that feel? Did you feel like you were one of the only women? Did you feel that you were somehow affected by the issues of feminism? Did they play a role in your work and in your life at that time?
I like to start off with that. I like my really big television. And I actually think Harriet and I are a very good pairing because we are getting to the same place, but walking on different roads. And that's a great thing to see the parallel between the two of us. Of course, I was completely enthralled by feminism. I'd been raised in it. We're probably about the same age. I was raised in the 50s and high school and college in the 60s. And my community, most families had both parents working. And so the woman, yes, would go to work, just as she said, and then come home and do more work. And the father maybe would have a second job we would call them hacks or, driving cars, being the original Uber people. Mm-hmm. And I just knew, because my mom said it and the other women said it around me, that my life was valuable and I had to go after it because I didn't have the matrix. I didn't have that institution to propel me through it. I'd have to go after it myself. And feminism was incredibly important because it meant that there was a rally cry that I could be embedded with. Certainly there were problems between African American and Euro American Caucasian women and it was up and down, but the idea that we're trying to foster in the society that women were not just okay, that we were equal and that we could show it through our artwork. We could make money at it. We could do amazing things and we could be a great partner to whoever we were with. That's the best thing to go after. And so, yes, that's what I did.
Joyce, you are known and for your whole career for jewelry that directly addresses a lot of sensitive cultural and political issues. We feature the Jonestown series in our book. Can you tell us a little bit about it and the reasons that you created it?
This falls into every trope, claptrap, racist situation that you can think about. Here we are in the 60s and 70s, Kennedys and Martin Luther King, and people are dying. They're being assassinated. People are walking over bridges. There's fighting. Dogs are biting people. And a white guy who is a messianic figure takes a group of basically African Americans to South America, Guyana, sets up this faux paradise, and eventually they are killed or commit suicide. How deeply more embedded in the idea of white supremacy and male supremacy can you get? It was very deep for me. It also brought up all kinds of religious schisms that I couldn't understand. Why? That's not true. I understood it. I just thought it was, I cuss a lot, so I'm not going to. Poop. I was raised in a apostolic Pentecostal church. I did street ministry. It would never occur to me to take people somewhere and make them drink something and kill them. It would never occur to me that that one human should be so powerful using the special words that they could overpower people like that, especially in a time where racism was so virulent, riding on horses. Racism to me, riding on horses like the 4 horses of the apocalypse. Not only how would he take them, how would they go? And I remember that when you're sitting around with old women, they're like this, something gonna happen. That ain't gonna work. That's not going to stand. And it did. So I made these pieces. Firstly, let me back up about jewelry. I love the idea that you can put a statement on you and draw someone. And like Harriet, that the work is so finely crafted, so amazing to the touch and to the view that somebody just has to be all up in it. And I love the idea that when you're there, you see that the image that you're viewing is about something really quite different. And maybe you and the person who has enough chutzpah to wear it can discuss what that's about. There's also something about jewelry usually being small enough to hold in your hand and peruse, made out of all kinds of materials that you can touch and revel in. And the fact that these are like that special one with the hair on the outside, Kool-Aid cocktail, or also like little insects that travel on your body. In Mexico, they would put a beetle on a chain and it was alive and it would crawl on you. That kind of stuff, those kind of deep embedded ideas that go straight back to not only what I was born with, but what I knew about African, indigenous, Asian, European, you know it, you name it, culture, about the religiosity and the innate importance of that small thing, made this quartet of pieces very spiritual and necessary to me.
When you made them, how were they received by a viewing public, by your fellow artists?
Well, I can tell you, there's some very different things. I was a weaver for many years, so it directly relates to that and the beadwork. There was that period in the 60s and 70s where soft sculpture was happening. I laugh at that because I always think that you call it that so you don't get as much money as the people who use metal get. I'm not talking about metal jewelers. I'm talking about, casting bronze and everything. So a lot of people who are working within the fiber or the soft sculpture milieu liked it. They understood it. I found that I got the most punchback when people didn't know I was an African American and thought that I was appropriating work about Africans, African Americans, and the death of these people. And how could I, because they were killed by a black guy. How could I do that? And then I had to explain about how the racial quotient of this had more to do with than the maker, and even to do with the murderer, the perpetrator. It had to do with the entire environment that the world is in. Mm-hmm. And I made it so that they would grab you and you would not only think about yourself, but the environment that you're in. And art can do that. The smallest piece can awaken you and help you evolve into something else, can enlighten you.
It's so true. And these pieces, like Harriet's appliances, like so much of the other work that we feature in this book, they are incredibly powerful works. They're a window into an artist's experience, into what was happening to society, to deep wells of emotion. That's something that we discovered over and over again. And I think that we were looking at these works as objects of art, understanding that they were wearable, but not necessarily thinking as much about the person wearing it, what their experience would be like out in the world. Joyce, who would you see wearing some of these really challenging, difficult works, or did it not matter and it was about the actual making and display of them?
All of that stuff matters. If you had the stone to walk around with a parchment cross or a person dying in a vat of Kool-Aid, if you have those stones, then I say, okay, it's up to you. All of that matters to me because this is my voice. I'm not a politician or a preacher. In fact, my friends tell me to shut up sometimes. You can see I talk too much. So my voice as a visual artist is the thing that allows me to shine some light on issues. You know, people get the wrong idea about many artists, at least the ones that I know. They think we live in an art house with art, in an art community, and we buy art food and we wear art clothes and we drink art drink. No, I live just with everybody else. And the issues that change me, hurt me, give me great joy are the same as the paper boy or the person who works at Walmart. So I have to be, for me personally, because I don't think all artists have to do any of this stuff. But for me personally, I have to be in it. Because better out than in. I don't want to feel that weight. I want the art to alleviate it for me. And while I'm putting it out, I want somebody else to be cleansed of it too. Or at least have the experience of having that opportunity.
Harriet, do you feel similarly?
I'm not as connected to people wearing it. Obviously, the appliances people didn't wear, and wasn't even connected, essentially tied to people buying them, as much as being in an exhibition, for example, a gallery or a show, that it would bring up a conversation, and the same purpose that jewelry would be. What I also wanted to add, though, was after reading the book, I realized that so many of the issues that were being discussed in the 60s and the 70s and 80s have come back so strongly. And it was like I am reading about the struggle of civil rights and how the jewelry would address that, or how social norms and American values had changed during that time. But they're also going through this radical transformation now. And I heard that echo in the book all the way through, how we're going through this really radical transformation in our society. It's really hard to see where it's going to go, but we see on the news now struggles about Black Lives Matter. And that was the issue that was really in the forefront in the 60s and 70s. And it's coming back with renewed visibility. Or what's happening now in the sense that the inequities in society, which people were trying to address in the 60s and 70s in some of the jewelry, is coming back now because we see those inequities and what's happening as our society fractures. So it's very interesting in that respect.
It is, and I wanted to end with that actually, because we're running out of time, to ask you, and you've answered it, Harriet, but Joyce, from your perspective, you know, what do you see as the legacy of the counterculture, artists, political and social action of that period? What's the legacy for today?
Well, to me, it is that it created, or let's say it fostered Harriet and I. It presented people that were in positions that could teach, that could guide, that could keep your foot in the door so somebody else could come in with you. And that legacy, that power of mentorship, being a mentee, that power of being able to use your personal force as an artist to help to push change in society, and also to make a way where there was no way for someone else. That hopefully is my legacy, and it was what others had given to me. And I see it now, because one of the great things is that art school exists. When I used to do a lot of crits, there'd be people in art school from everywhere, and they were making really finely crafted gold, and they were making things out of rubber bands, sometimes combining the two. And you saw not only the joie de vivre, but you saw that they had that they'd been released and freed of many of the rules that kept them squelched creatively, whether it's because of their ethnicity or their gender or their age, all of that. You see that's part of the legacy of that time.
Well, I am truly sorry that we have to wind up, because this conversation is fascinating and I feel like it could go on for hours and we would all still be riveted. But I want to thank Harriet, you and Joyce, for your insights, for your participation. For our audience, I want to thank everyone for coming. For those of you who are aware of the jewelry today, and metalwork by artists who are tackling issues of civil rights and social unrest and politics and the environment, feminism, read our book and see the origins of this work in America and how it really helped define what American jewelry was and what it's become. Please do. I know that you can get this book from Amazon and other places. Please get it from Art Jewelry Forum to support the great programming that we do. As Yvonne said, all of the proceeds will go to support that. Or if not, please use an independent bookstore to acquire it. And join Art Jewelry Forum as a member and go see 45 Stories at, if you're so lucky to be in New York City, because none of us can travel, go see Barbara Gifford's fantastic exhibition at the Museum of Arts and Design. And thank you all again, and we'll all stay in touch.